And I just do have a question which I wanted to ask answered. If anyone has a question on this section, and feel free to put it in the chat, or you can just ask before we quickly move on. About to release a track where my producer has altered some of the chords. Do they require a split? It would constitute as having written on it and having contributed to the creation of the track. So I would say that it would be fair to give them something, and they might expect something. It wouldn't necessarily be a lot though. It wouldn't necessarily be a large percentage, I don't think, in my opinion. But on paper, it constitutes to contributing to the creation of that track. So therefore, I would say, Ellen, that yes, they could get some. But it's a conversation with them. Like I've had people do that, and they're like, "No, keep your PRS. It's fine." So it just depends. It depends. But it's probably good to have that chat. Have they raised it or not? No, they haven't. Okay. It's up to you. I would from an integrity standpoint maybe raise it. Oh, my light went off. Sorry. From integrity standpoint, raise it if you want to make sure that they get what they have get something for their contribution. But nothing is a must in this game. Does anyone have any more questions about song splits or anything like that before we move on? No? Law? I'm going to turn my light on, sorry. My plant
I'm going
light.
to talk very quickly about music publishing. So obviously we've been talking about songwriting and shares of songwriting, and your music publishing is really about valuing and protecting your music. So many independent artists are unpublished. That means they don't have a company that's managing their songwriting and they're collecting for them. They're doing it themselves, but some do. But to put it more simply, that music publishing companies take the admin side of things, such as receiving the royalty payment, making sure things are registered appropriately, and all of that. It basically relieves the artists of the workload so they can continue their creativity. So when you're offered a publishing deal, not only is it very attractive to have someone take all of that off your hands, but they often will give you quite a sizable advance as well, because the other role that music publishing companies have is to try and find opportunities to place your songs for syncs. So either for TV shows or films, soundtracks, or even to be used in commercials, but also songwriting opportunities and collaborations with other artists or for other artists. So not only do they sign up their artists to PRS, they also will collect all around the world for you. So if you don't have a publishing deal, you may think, well, where does that leave me? Well, luckily, there are companies that are designed for the independent artist, really. I know two of you already listened to our podcast, but actually today we released an episode where we spoke to Lara Baker from the Song Trust. And Song Trust is a company that is a publishing admin company. Now, obviously, most of you will be familiar with a major record label, and have many of you heard of artist label services? So it's like distributors, but it's in between just putting your stuff out through, Ditto or TuneCore or somebody like that, and in between a major label. It's like they basically serve the track for you, but you retain all the ownership of your music and all the masters. Well, companies like Song Trust, it's not the only one, there's also a well-known one called Centric, are a little bit like that version of the publishing company. So you retain all of your masters, all the ownership of your music, because the thing is, if you sign with a publishing company, they then own the rights to your music. So you retain all of that, but they will take care of all the administration for you. And it is enough, in a sense, to be registered with PRS and PPL, as we have drummed into from the start of this seminar. But what PRS and PPL don't do is register your music in all the equivalents of PRS and PPL in all the different countries. So every country has their own PRS or PPL. So PRS will collect for you, and they do have like a broad sort of agreement, but that's provided that the country actually does all of their reports. The advantage of being with a publishing admin company like Song Trust is they will actually join each individual society in each individual country for you. So they're going to collect for you in those countries, then report it back to PRS. So, sometimes you might be being played in a country that you've never been to, and you don't know how, but somehow your music is being played there. And that means that's music due to you. So that's music, that's money that could be coming to you for you doing nothing other than registering with these companies. We had a kind of a weird but cool thing that happened with Bianca a few years ago, when we accidentally found out that they are really feeling her in South America. We don't know why, we don't know how, but we were just basically running some digital ads, and we just found that her music really resonated in Colombia, in Brazil, in Mexico. And we would never have known that if we'd not done these ads. But now we also realize it's really worth her music being registered in those countries, because even now when we look on her on the iTunes Apple for artists, her music is most Shazammed in those countries. So it's obviously being played somewhere for people to Shazam it. So by being a member of Song Trust, which Bianca is, they will now join her to the membership societies in those countries. It would be very unlikely that those earnings would make its way back to Bianca if she was only registered with PRS. So I was actually going to share a little bit of their website. Because we're so short on time, I won't, but I will make sure we add it onto the handout for you. Because the other thing about Song Trust in particular is they have got some really great resources for independent artists. So you can download split sheets that you can use, which we've already spoken about. They also have a free, I think it's called something like the Quick Guide or Thorough Guide to Music Publishing, and it's a free course that you can do. So it will literally teach you for free the basics and why it's so important. So not only is it a great thing to join, but also there's some great resources there. There is a fee to join, and they also do take 15% of the royalties that they collect for you. But because a lovely chat with Laura Baker from Song Trust, anyone who joins and says they've heard the podcast or have heard through us will be given a discount to join. So again, I can put her email address. We'll make sure we add that to the handout information, or just have a listen to the podcast episode today, because in the description there's a link to her email address there as well.
Yeah, and also just to say that I think if you actually register your music, if you register with Song Trust and then you register your releases with Song Trust, you don't have to do it with PRS as well. They do it for you. It's not that you don't have to be a member of PRS, but you don't have to do all the work twice. So if you sign up with Song Trust, they'll do all that work for you from the PRS standpoint. I learned that was a new thing I learned when we did them. If there's any more questions, we just want this to be as helpful for you guys as possible. So if you have any questions, even if they're not 100% related to what we're talking about, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll try and get to those too. I'm just want to do a quick word on DSPs, which you probably all know about, but just wanted to, it's another way that we earn money, even though it's a little bit. DSPs, it's distribution. They're the digital service provider, and basically they're the middleman. As you know, as you probably know, that you can't just go up onto Apple, onto Spotify, and just put your music up on there. You have to go through a middleman. That middleman is a DSP, and there are loads of them. They all pretty much do a similar job. It's just whichever one you pretty much like. In terms of their fee structure, or how do they charge you per year, or do they do a one-off fee, all the different, or just do you like their website, do you know what I mean? Or some, if you want to give a digital booklet with your album, some do it, some don't. It's just whatever tickles your fancy, really. A lot of people are with DistroKid, they're pretty popular. And so just some best practice around that. It's probably good to upload your music at least 4 to 6 weeks before your actual release. If you want to be considered for any playlisting, I think it's about 60,000 songs or so are uploaded to streaming services like Spotify a day. And so you think of all these editors that are listening to this music in different genres to then add them to their playlist. There's a lot to trawl through. So as early as you can, to getting it up and registered with the DSP, then there is much more time for you to be considered for just that little bit of help you can get from these individual platforms. Um, and another thing I want to say, which was in line with what Loretta said earlier, it's really important to, in our opinion, to register your music as with as many platforms as possible. And there's some people who maybe, they may only listen to Spotify or Apple. They think those are just the biggest ones, or Tidal, just going to register my music with the main ones. But different territories, some platforms are bigger in different territories than others. And as Loretta said, like, for some reason, I have a lot of people who listen to my music in South America. And when I discovered this, some people who were there, when I'd have a new release, they would send me a message on socials and say, please make sure you upload your music onto Deezer. And what I realized is that Deezer is the most popular streaming platform in South America, or at that time. This was like last year or the year before. I think it still is. And so if I had missed out Deezer, all of those people would find it difficult to listen to my music if they were registered with Deezer and they didn't have access to the other ones. So um, when you go to register your music with the DSP, do just click all the things. You might think Pandora is not anything special or whatever, but just do all of them, in our opinion, so that there's no friction or barrier between you and your potential new fans. And I think that's it on that. I don't want to labor distribution because I think everybody knows about distribution. If you have a question about distribution, please do pop it in the chat.
Cool.
And
I mean, I think last thing I think, B, that you should just really quickly go over before we take any general questions is just to mention in about gigs. Like, obviously, gigs have been a complete non-thing for the last year with the pandemic. But it's before, the what we've experienced, that would be the most obvious way to earn money, through gigs and through your merchandising at your gigs. Even terms, and it's sometimes hard to go that leap from doing free gigs to paid gigs. And I just wanted to make sure that we at least touched on that just a little bit. So, B, do you want to talk a little bit about that quickly?
yeah, I mean, yeah, gigs is one of those things. It is hard to get paid to perform, and the typical trajectory, which was like mine, was, you start off with the open mics and you do that, and then you kind of graduate to gig nights where there are three or four of you, and you might get paid expenses, or you might get paid something to do those gigs. Then there's so far as well, where they do pay you. I think they pay you like £100 now, I think it is, per gig, and or being asked to do shows and festivals and different types of gigs by promoters and event organizers. Those are like, in general, the ways that you can get paid. And obviously these do translate now to online gigs because they're a thing and they're probably going to be here to stay. But generally you start off with the free stuff. And I think I want to stress that free gigs are not bad gigs. They're so important. It's so important to do the free gigs. I still would consider a free gig even at this point, where I generally won't. But the reasons why I would is because it's practice for me. If I've got new material, actually, when I'm doing a gig, if I do a gig, I'm going to meet somebody that helps me along the way. I've met so many people, band members, people from the music industry, so many people that it helps. Like, if I didn't go to that gig, I wouldn't have met that person, and then that person helped me in this way and that way. So doing free gigs is important. It is important even if it's not a paid gig. Also, gigs beget gigs. Like, when you do gigs, you just get more gigs, and the more you're out there, the more opportunity there is to get more gigs and then start to be paid for your gigs. So I wouldn't wouldn't say no to a free gig, but there will come a point where doing mostly free gigs is not beneficial to you anymore, and you'll know, or you'll get a feeling when you get to that point where, well, actually, I don't need to do these gigs so much to hone my craft, or to practice my performance skills, or it's not a networking thing, so there's a point where it's important to transition and to maybe turn down gigs. And Loretta's going to talk about just some best practice when you're kind of saying no to gigs. It's not really a no, it's just a nice way to, there's a nicer way to go about that. But yeah, I think that was a general thing. Was
Yeah.
anything else to talk about on that?
Yeah, we are aware that we're speeding through a lot of this stuff because of the time, we normally spend a lot more time on it. But yeah, just the thing to say, I think as artists are quite, they find it really hard to ask for things. We've been talking about this a lot on our podcast. I think we feel so grateful if someone gives us a gig or gives us something or likes our music. But actually, there does come a point when to know the worth of your music. And when you've really kind of rinsed that open mic, scene in your area, and you've done enough of the what we call the toilet gigs, which I actually think are actually really valuable. It's where you cut your teeth. If you haven't done a gig with people watching the rugby behind you, like not even listening, then you haven't done a proper gig. But there does get to a point where you're like, okay, I actually want people to listen and appreciate my music now and actually know my value as well. And if someone approaches you about a gig or you apply for a gig, I think the very easy thing to open up the conversation about money is just to assume there is one. And just say, hey, I'd love to be involved with this. Can you just let me know what my fee will be for the night? This is where I'm coming from. So these are my travel expenses. Can you let me know what the fee is? And that at least then gives them the opportunity to either think, okay, we're not going to get away with not paying this person something. And because sometimes if people can get away with it, they just won't pay you anyway. But it also means that if they hadn't thought to pay you and they thought, oh, okay, yeah, actually, maybe I should pay them, you can at least start to negotiate that. If somebody says, well, we don't have much money, we've got a bit of a small budget, then I'd say, this is what I usually charge. Can you let me know if that's something that you for, or not even, don't give them the out of, is that something you can afford? Just say, well, this is what I would normally charge, and decide for you what would be worth your while for you to go. And obviously you're not going to like put £5 million or something, and if it's just you and a guitar, you just want it to cover your expenses and make sure that you've made like 50 quid on the night or something like that. So think of venue, the size of the gig, how long you're going to be playing, and all of those things. If they come back and say we can't do that, then you can always say, okay, well, if you can cover my expenses and then give me this much, I'd be willing to do that. So again, I think it's about making sure you let them know this is going to cost me to come. Like if you have no fee at all and you even got to get there and it's at a time when you wouldn't have eaten, you want it to at least not be out of pocket. So there's something about, even if you come away and you've made a profit of 10 quid, it's still saying to them, hey, don't expect that I'm going to keep doing this for free. Or even if you say, on this occasion, I'd be happy to do it for this, but perhaps if you have me back, we could go to my normal fee. Another one is if somebody asks you how much you would charge, is to go in slightly higher than you'd like to come away with, so you've got some room to come down. And again, not going really extortionate, but just going a bit so you could say something that they're probably not going to agree with, but then you can go back and say, okay, on this occasion I would do it for this much. If you go in for like the absolute minimum you're going to take, they're probably going to try and negotiate you down as well. And then I think there does get a point, if somebody just says, oh, sorry, there's no fee, there will get to a point where you have to think, you know what, I've done this gig before, or I've done this level of gig before, and it's time for me to get paid. And then you don't have to go like, stuff you, give me money, give me some money, but you can reply and just say, thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm actually going to be out of pocket if I come to this. I'm going to decline on this occasion. If you do find yourself in a position where you have budget, I would love to play your venue, so please come back to me. So you're being really polite. You're saying, I'd actually like to do this, but I actually can't afford to do this. This is what I do, even if you've got another job at the side of it. So there's a way of being polite and keep that door open. And they either will just you'll not hear from them again, which again is something you've got to be willing for, or they may go, actually, they were really good. I would like them to pay. It's fair to give them a little bit. Or they come back and go, okay, well, we've actually only got 50 quid. And if you hadn't said that, they may not have. And then the other thing is, you may get to a point where you start gigging less. I know there was a time when Bianca was gigging every single night of the week when it was open mics and things like that. But you might get to a point in your career when you're saying no to more gigs than you're saying yes to, but you're starting to be paid. So you're out there less, but you're actually earning more money than for what you were doing. So it's all about knowing your value and not expecting too much, but just beginning to ask for something that's completely reasonable, and knowing that, you know, lots of these venues do have a budget, and if they haven't thought about giving a budget to artists, then they certainly should. So maybe you should put that thought in their mind.
Yeah, and so that's I think the end of our part of it. We have always have so much more to say, but I think we have almost come to the end of time. So if you have any questions on anything to do with independent artist life, or on what we've spoken about today, please you can shout out or put it in the chat. I've got something on sync deals. Loretta, I might give that one to you just because you probably know more about that than me. Um,
Yep, sure. I mean, sync deals are kind of the, well, they're not the holy grail because they're not that they're not completely rare, but they're the thing that all artists want because they could be very, very lucrative indeed. But they're not as commonplace, I think, as people think they are. They can be quite difficult to get, but it does happen. So a sync deal is basically when somebody uses your music for, like I mentioned earlier, a movie soundtrack, for an advert, for a commercial, but it also counts if your music is played. Say you've got that scene in EastEnders and there's somebody, you know, there's music playing in the background on the radio in the Old Vic, then that still, if it's your song, you get some money for that, and it's quite a lot of money as well. So if you've got a publisher, publishers should be pitching your music for all of those different things. It's easier, and most syncs do come through having a publisher because they have those connections with the companies and the big advertising firms. But it's not unheard of for independent artists to get them. Bianca actually went for one. We didn't actually get it in the end, but we were approached and asked, specifically, she was asked to demo up a song for a commercial in the US. They'd heard her voice and really liked her voice. So we did it. She got paid a small fee for the demo, so it's still kind of worth it for that, but it would have been a lot of money if it had been placed. And that was just through a company that specifically likes to work with independent artists, but they approached us, and I'd had an artist, one of my other artists had an advert with T-Mobile in the US through them as well. But Centric, which does the same thing that Song Trust does, they actually do have a sync arm. So you can register your money to be placed for sync. Again, none of it's guaranteed that you're definitely going to get one, but they do pitch independent artists for sync deals. There are also independent companies, and you're probably at some point will be approached if you put music out there by somebody who says, do you want to add your music to our library? Do be really careful with them. There are quite a few scammer ones out there, and the deals they get you to sign, but without you realizing it, suddenly your music is exclusively with them. So the things to remember, you want it to be a non-exclusive deal, which means if they represent your song and place it somewhere, it still means you can place it with else, because you don't want to be that they've placed it for some weird indie film and you've got 200 quid, and then the next week Sainsbury's want to do it and you would have got £25,000. So you want to make sure that you can still use your music. And the other thing is the split should really, with those smaller companies, be like 80-20 in your favor. That's the kind of thing you want to be looking for those. So they're kind of, there's lots of small print as well, but it hasn't got those two things. I wouldn't really advise you to sign up for those. So it is a little bit like one of those things that you want to happen, but at the same time, it's kind of hard to know how to happen. And all I can say with all of things of independent artists is the more you do, the more that opportunities come to you. I know that just sounds really lame and really airy-fairy, but that really is what has been our experience. Just be excellent, be consistent, and be persistent. And if you're those three things, opportunities do come your way.
yeah. There aren't any more questions. Katie said thank you. Oh, that's awesome. I'm pleased that the splits helped UKD. Yeah. If you have any other questions or anything like that after this, we are on Instagram. You can follow us there, and you can hit us up in our DMs. We sometimes take like a few days to get to our DMs, but we do eventually get to our DMs, and we'll answer your questions there. But yeah, it was awesome to share with you guys today.